Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helps to sort of get some definitions down to start. So, Mythos, that was released in April by Anthropic. It's their latest model, but it was not released to the public because the company was too worried that it had a lot of cyber capabilities and it could be used for cyber attacks. So, it was only released to a limited group of government and business partners to sort of help those partners shore up their own cybersecurity efforts. What happened last week was Anthropic actually released a version of that model with some added safeguards to the public. So that's what we call Fable 5. And that's sort of what started this whole situation between the government and Anthropic. So a few days after that public release, the government sent Anthropic a letter that was an export control directive that essentially blocked anyone who was a foreign national from even accessing that Fable 5 or that Mythos 5 model. So in effect, Anthropic was forced to immediately disable those models, especially since they have foreign nationals who are employees. So this affects their employees, it affects their customers. All of a sudden, they're only able to provide these models to
Yeah.
US citizens, and they don't even have a way currently of sort of a know your customer standard in terms of where those people reside who are using their
I'm glad
models.
you said that because I'm opening Claude from Anthropic right now on my phone. I don't pay for it, but I have it. I can use it. I had the ability to use Fable 5 if I paid for it, but now it says currently unavailable. It also advertises that it's for your toughest challenges. But Claude has no idea where I live in terms of like what my nationality is. So they just have to disable it because they don't have those know your customer guardrails in place.
Exactly. It would definitely take some time to develop those. There could be some privacy concerns from folks in Washington. It certainly wasn't something that they could do on very short notice, and they were sent this letter at a pretty quick turnaround. So as we've reported, Anthropic executives are now in Washington, D.C. They're meeting with the Commerce Department today. We'll see what comes of that. They're trying to work through this. The concern here, I should point out, and Anthropic has said this in their statement, they believe that the government is concerned about a jailbreak. Now, there's not necessarily one definition for what that is, but typically it means that users who are using Fable might be able to prompt it in a certain way so that they're able to access those cyber advanced capabilities that they're not supposed to access. So Microsoft was involved in surfacing this vulnerability, and that's certainly going to be dominating the conversation in terms of just trying to figure out if this is something Anthropic could fix, if they could potentially fix it with more of these know your customer standards. So that's what's going on right now, and we'll have to see if they're able to work this out and somehow remove that export control.
So on one hand, Maggie, it seems like the White House, the Trump administration, is actually very keen to what could possibly happen and is staying ahead of the game, it almost sounds like. Who is leading kind of the strategy and the process when it comes to the White House? And it sounds like the expertise is there. Is that correct? Because I feel like with social media, we felt like maybe everybody didn't quite understand everything that was going on. And so there's been some consequences as a result. But it does sound like the team at the White House and the administration is kind of on top of things. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think a few things. Like at the principal level, after Mythos was released in April, you did kind of see this full government response. Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, got involved. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Sean Carncross, the director of the National Cyber efforts. So you saw a lot of actors coming together very quickly to essentially write an executive order to make sure that the government could have early access to these cyber capable models, including Mythos. So this cyber use case kind of scared everyone, woke everyone up across the Trump administration. But what we're seeing now is a little bit more confusion, I guess, and it's unclear exactly what the policy is because that executive order, in the process of writing it, there was some internal policy debate over whether this should be a mandatory regime or a voluntary one. And ultimately, what you saw in that executive order in early June was a completely voluntary situation where AI model companies on on their own terms, would offer their models to the government, and the government would sort of review them, help them ensure that everything was safe. At the same time, the government would be able to make sure that critical infrastructure and its own data was protected from potential cyber attacks. And this was all going to be sort of a kumbaya voluntary thing. And I guess the lack of clarity now is what we're seeing is it's really no longer voluntary for Anthropic in this case. When push came to shove, the company was doing something that the government didn't like, and then ultimately found a tool to sort of compel it into paying more attention to this jailbreak. So that's definitely casting some uncertainty onto the whole industry, because Anthropic is not the only one sort of operating under this voluntary situation. And it seems that potentially it's more voluntary, but with a looming threat of, you could be compelled to do something if the government decides to do that.
Maggie, I'm curious, the folks you talk to who are observers of this type of technology and understand tech policy, do any of them say that we're missing the mark here? Because what I think about is the constant refrain, which is like the word you're using right now, the worst version of AI that will be available. You have all these companies here in the US that are working on this. You have all these companies in China that are working on this. And here we are talking about some model that a year from now is going to look like pretty basic and simple if the last 3 years are, any indication of how quickly this technology moves. Are we just missing the mark here by focusing on this one thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of criticism, both like in the cybersecurity community and in the AI policy community to this decision. I think the main criticism is just that it's a bit incoherent, right? It's sort of like this is probably the worst thing for AI model companies is like regulatory uncertainty, because this was done through essentially a letter. So it's not public. And Anthropic has said that it wasn't even clear exactly why this was done. They only found out later, that is their position. They found out later that the government was worried about this vulnerability. So certainly some folks have said that the Trump administration is missing the mark because, if they wanted to do a more regulatory approach, they should make that clear, right? Because that would be the best thing for the markets, is to have just a clear signal in terms of what the regulation was going to be. Or if they were going to take sort of the pro-innovation, laissez-faire approach, then sort of doing something like this in a last-minute export control, blocking all foreign access, is certainly not aligned with that. So I think the main criticism right now is just the lack of coherence, which is probably the worst thing for the market, even compared to a more clear regulatory policy.
Yeah, and it does wonder, as you and the team in your reporting, Maggie, say, after decades of disseminating cutting-edge U.S. technology around the world as a diplomatic and economic tool, Washington is now moving in the opposite direction. And you do wonder, is it not just a Trump administration shift, but maybe something that on both sides of the political aisle there's been a pulling back? Because it's safe to say there was certainly, the continuation of Trump's first term policies when it came to China on certain things and technology in the Biden administration. So you do wonder if this is something more significant going on.
Yeah, there's definitely this unique tension with artificial intelligence in particular, where folks in Washington are concerned that actually, disseminating this technology might be sort of at odds with actually preventing foreign actors like China and Russia from accessing it. The U.S. adversaries, the people that they don't want to access it. So this is kind of a unique tension, and it's been, currently, as we're seeing, it's sort of leaning in the direction of safety, which is certainly not what we would have expected from the Trump administration at the start of the president's term. But I think it's one thing to say that you want to have, a light touch approach. It's another to actually be sort of confronted with these cyber vulnerabilities, as folks like Scott Besson have been, and then to sort of figure it out on the fly.